The Lord be with you. Well, what is in your pandemic playlist? What has been getting you through these very strange and difficult times that we have been going through? Times where people are divided, people are polarized, there's a lot of hatred going around, a lot of political intrigue and things going on the world stage. Sometimes we just need little distractions and cultural engagement to kind of help give us some ideas of ways to remind us that there are just other things going on. Positive things, things to lift up our spirits and things to point us towards our better selves, or some might say our better angels. So the so-called pandemic playlist are things that we're reading, things that we're watching, things that we're listening to that are just helping us cope and maybe giving us a good, healthy distraction. Now, we have talked about lots of things over these last dozens of volumes that we've done now. Movies, TV shows, books, music. A lot of it has been lighthearted and hopeful, which is helpful to get us through the days that are strange and depressing, and we have a lot of mental health struggles in. Some of them have been heavy as well, to remind us that the world has some heavy things in it. I think particularly of that limited series Chernobyl, and how sometimes it's a good reminder to know that we've gone through difficult things in the past, and thanks be to God, we've survived them. Now, this time around, what I would like to recommend for you is another book. So this is a book called Strange Pilgrims by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Mr. Marquez is a Colombian writer, and these are a collection of 12 short stories that he's written. And I tend to like short stories. I always have, ever since I was in junior high and high school and had to do book reports. I found that short stories were very accessible. They were self-contained, so you could burn through them rather quickly. And once you finished one, it encouraged you to go on and to do the next one. As opposed to reading a chapter book where you have to stay interested in the long-form plot, short stories, for me at least, tend to stimulate my imagination much quicker. And a collection I seem to read a little easier than I do an actual novel. So let me give you a little bit of history of how I came across this collection of short stories in the first place. When my wife and I were married, we stayed at a bed and breakfast on our wedding night. And we didn't get to spend a whole lot of time there. You know, you do the wedding reception till really, really late. And then I believe we had an extended checkout the next morning, but it was only like an hour extra. And then we were packing up and heading off to an airport for our honeymoon. So what we did for quite a few years was, on our anniversary, we would go stay, and we'd go back to that same bed and breakfast that we stayed at on our wedding night. And what we found is they have a lovely little activity room that has puzzles in it. It's got games in it. It's got movies, DVDs in it, and it has a collection of books, just random books sitting there that you can take. You can take any of those items back to your room and just have some downtime. So there were several times I would peruse a book, and I would take it with me for the weekend, and I would read a little bit here and read a little bit there. And Strange Pilgrims was one of those books from early on one anniversary, that I picked up because it was short stories, because I knew I wasn't going to finish a novel in the 2 or 3 days that we were going to spend there for our anniversary. But I could read a couple of the short stories. What I found every year that we would go back to that bed and breakfast is that book was still there. So I would pick it up each time, and I would read another short story, or maybe a couple more short stories. We got out of the habit of that once we started having kids, and it became a little bit more and more difficult to get away. And after several years, we did end up going back to that same bed and breakfast, and they had redone their little nook, that little activity room. They had made it into something else, and they had gotten rid of a lot of those puzzles and games. They still had some movies, some DVDs, but a lot of their book selection, including Strange Pilgrims, was gone. So a few years ago on my birthday, I actually asked my wife for that book because I had never finished reading it, and she got it for me. And every year, I just read another story or two. I started from the beginning once I got it, and I haven't quite finished it yet. And I think part of me doesn't want to finish it because it's had a legacy for so long as a part of my wedded life. So what I like about Mr. Marquez's fiction style is he writes, all of these stories are about Latin Americans in other places. I believe Mr. Marquez himself, who passed away back in 2014, I believe, he was exiled from his home country of Colombia. And a lot of that comes out in the experiences of these stories. I don't know how to describe the stories. Some of them seem just dramatic, some of them very realistic, some of them a little more fantastical. There's a little bit of magical elements here and there. But they all tell stories about foreigners who are displaced or who are sort of out of place. And because of that, they suffer differing degrees of positive things as well as negative things. One of the things that I love is that each of the stories has a little bit of a twist or a turn at the end. It's not like an M. Night Shyamalan, boy, I never saw that coming kind of twist, but it's just something that highlights one of the themes. It's a little bit of a surprise, a little bit of a highlight, and I just think he's a very good storyteller. So some of the stories in here, there's one called The Saint, about a man whose daughter died at a very young age. And when they exhume her body years and years later, because they're going to put in a dam in that location, and all of the graves are getting moved, they find that her body has been completely preserved. But this man has to travel to Rome, to the Pope, to make a case for why she should be sainted. And just so many interesting details in that, and just sort of the frustration of what clearly all of the locals see as a miracle. Sometimes there's a lot of bureaucracy in the church, and it takes a lot to kind of overcome and to keep pressing on and not become cynical in the midst of that. There is a story called I Only Came to Use the Phone, and it's just one of those the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time kind of stories that frustrate you. It definitely draws out something emotional, a kind of anger, a kind of displeasure, which I think is what good writing can do. He has some lovely fantastical ones, including I Sell My Dreams and Sleeping Beauty and the Airplane and Light is Like Water. I find this just a good read, especially if you are not used to reading someone from outside of your own culture. Now, Strange Pilgrims is a translation into English. It obviously was written more in the Latin tongue that Mr. Marquez comes from. But it is a beautiful work, I think. I am not someone who tracks well with cities and locations outside of the United States. And yet I found his storytelling ability transcended. As a matter of fact, he has a beautiful little prologue or introduction at the beginning that just tells a very interesting detail of how these 12 stories came together. These were stories he wrote over an 18-year period in the 1970s and 80s, but they didn't get published together until 1992, and how they came together and how he wrote them and rewrote them and how they manifested themselves in different incarnations is almost as interesting as the stories themselves. So I'm going to recommend for you Strange Pilgrims. Give it a read. It's rather short. It's rather quick. Again, if you like short stories and you can burn through them as easily as I can, I would be curious what you think. We try to treat this particular video series as an online community. So we are looking for the usual things. Thumbs up if you like the video. If you know someone who might benefit from hearing a brief recommendation or review of this book, feel free to share it with people. Put comments below if you have ever read anything by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Let me know if you're going to read him. Let me know. If you have read him after this recommendation, let me know what you think. And if you have other books or movies or songs that you think are recommendable, put those in the comments as well. And we will keep journeying through these days. So until the next time, may the peace of God be with you. Amen.